All right, so in the previous video, we went over our psychology meter. And in the videos before that, we also went over, again, approaching psychology first from a technical analysis standpoint. So making that environment very easy to actually stick to keep our psychology in check. And that is our goal, of course. Now, if we use the same analogy that we used in one of the first videos in the Psychology Week, then we mentioned if we want to stick to our diet, the environment to actually stick to our diet should be easy. So if we have not included chocolate cookies into our diet, then we should not have chocolate cookies in our close vicinity, as in we should not have it in our house, in some cupboard where we can now get a chocolate cookie. No, that's not what we should do. So there's still going to be triggers, right? Because you still might go out of the house. You might still see a chocolate cookie store. You might still see the supermarket, the grocery store, where you can now get a chocolate cookie. You might still be able to order it. So the environment at home is made easy right now. So at the core, at the foundation, it is made easy. But we still could have some kind of triggers, some kind of obstacles that come our way. That could be quite disturbing. So how do we go about those obstacles? That is exactly where the worksheets now come in. So to compare it to trading, of course, is the environment, our trading plan, our trading strategy has made it quite easy to now keep our psychology in check. Whilst we are keeping our psychology in check, of course, when we are placing an entry, we might still experience some fear. So how do we go about that? When we take a loss, we might still experience some anger. We might still experience some lack of confidence or the overconfidence, that greed that we're having. So those last pieces, the last piece of those obstacles is exactly what we're going to go over right now. Now, the data collection worksheet, tracking your emotions right here. This data collection worksheet is attached beneath this video, which you can use. And it's very important to understand that every single step that we have, so we have 3 steps right here. The first step has a goal, as a data collection worksheet has a goal, which is finding the obstacle that we are actually dealing with. Because of course, like I mentioned as well, if we are not aware what we're actually dealing with, then how can we get rid of it? So the first step to everything is finding what actually is the obstacle. The data collection worksheet helps us to acknowledge that obstacle, to find the obstacle. Now, it is also very important to understand that the data collection worksheet is a tool. Just as Notion is a tool, just as recording yourself, because recording yourself, you might talk in a certain way where you think, hey, I think I have found an obstacle right now. So these are tools to get you to the goal of finding the obstacle, which is the first step, finding the obstacle. The tools can be used in different ways, as in the data collection worksheet, again, is a tool to help you guide you towards the goal, which is finding the obstacle. Does it mean you need to actually use the data collection worksheet? No. If you have your own journal, for example, and you want to do it with pen and paper, perfectly fine. You want to do it with Notion, perfectly fine. You want to do it through recording yourself and watching it back, perfectly fine. As long as we achieve the goal. That's the goal, no pun intended. So that is very important right here, where the data collection worksheet, how would we go about using this? Then again, the time and the date right there, well, you can fill that in, but what is the most relevant thing is finding the goal. So let's find the goal. So the time and date, is it super relevant? We could argue yes and no, but the most relevant thing is finding that goal. So the instrument / situation is where you can fill in any situation, whatever you want. But the most important part is here. What is the trigger? What are the thoughts after that? What are then the emotions coming up? What are then the behaviors? And what are then the actions, the change in decision making that eventually comes up, then the change in market perception, and then the mistakes we end up actually making. So let's start with the trigger right there. The trigger is what? The trigger can be anything as, I took a loss. I took a trade and I took a loss right there. That's my trigger. So what are my thoughts that come after that trigger? Well, my thoughts right now are, I'm a little bit annoyed, a little bit angry you could call it, but I'm a little bit annoyed because I see price takes me out and it still ends up going in my direction. So I'm a little bit annoyed. Perfect. What are the emotions that start to rise? Well, this is definitely anger. I'm definitely getting more so angry. So the emotions right here are angry. Could even be greed, a small piece of greed right there, because those emotions are quite correlated, where we are getting a little bit angry. So we might also get a little bit greedy because we want to get back in that move. All right, perfect. As we know that, then we also now need to pay attention to the behaviors. What are the behaviors that we are now doing? So the way I see the behaviors is, again, when you are getting angry, when you're getting annoyed, when you're getting greedy, it's not necessarily a binary thing. It's also a thought process, as in it's a process leading you from A to all the way to Z. So in between those letters from A to Z, we also have F, we also have B, we also have D. So at those different stages, those different letters, what happens in our behavior that might alert, that might signal us that we are getting angry? For example, if a person gets angry, what is a typical behavior? They might start hitting something. So they might actually start hitting their desk a little bit, start tapping that desk quite loud. So those behaviors right there could now lead us to understanding, oh, I'm tapping my desk. Hey, I am getting angry. Or for example, can also be sweating. I'm starting to sweat a little bit more. Maybe I'm getting anxious. Maybe I'm getting angry. I'm starting to get red. Maybe I'm getting angry. I start to use all my face muscles and start to look angry. And if I release them, I'm being aware of them. Whoa, I just triggered all my face muscles. I'm getting a headache because I used all my face muscles right there. Those are different behaviors that could understand us, that could give us the understanding. All right, we are now starting to move from A to Z, to actually that Z being the end, well, not the goal, but the end right there, where we could get angry. So that is very important, that we need to intercept ourselves doing those behaviors. So the behaviors right there, write them down. What kind of behaviors are you having? Then the actions. So what could now be the actions after those behaviors? Well, the actions, the way I like to see them, is the actions you actually perform in your chart. So what are you now doing? Are you starting to look to place a new entry? Are you now using the position tool on TradingView to look at a new entry? Are you now opening your MetaTrader to find, hey, can I get a new entry? Would the RR be worth it, etc.? So those things are our actions right now. So the change in decision making, where first off we would be calm. We right now are getting angry, so we are not sticking to our trading plan, not to our limit, and we're trying to rush into the market again. That leads to the change in market perception, where we now think the market is only going our way. So the market is sort of going against us. It just took us out, and we think it is definitely going higher. Because we are not keeping an open mind anymore, right? We are not keeping an open mind anymore. Why not? Because it just took us out, and we immediately, our first reaction, our first response right there is, oh, it's still moving into our direction. So it must be taking us out, and it must still be hitting take profit right there. So the change in market perception is that you can't keep an open mind anymore. You now are almost convinced of the fact that it is going into your direction. So that is the change in market perception. Then the mistakes that we make, well, all the mistakes that we make right there, the change in market perception, the change in decision making, but the overall mistake is now the end thing. That is overtrading. That is revenge trading right now. That was the biggest mistake that everything is summed up right there. That is the mistake that we are dealing with. So the obstacle here is revenge trading, is overtrading, is getting angry right there. Perfect. If we know that, then data collection is achieved. The goal is achieved because we have now found an obstacle. Once we have found an obstacle, the next part is we need to gather the details. So how can we go about gathering the details? Well, we can gather the details through this right here, the anger profile. Again, the anger profile and the different profiles that you will also see on all the emotional errors that we might encounter, they will also be linked. This anger profile is just for us to actually gather the details. So the goal here is to gather the details. First sign you have become angry. that can be a very early sign. Remember what I talked about? When we want to move from A to Z, in between that, we have a plethora of letters that we need to encounter first. So at A, we might still be calm, and it might be a small trigger, as in it might be a loss, something annoying happens, etc. Someone in our room slams the door, for example, quite annoying. That might be the first trigger that we actually get a little bit annoyed, get a little bit angry right there. So the first sign you've become angry can be, again, as little as I'm now tapping my desk. I notice I'm getting angry. Can also be in your psychology, right? Can also be in your mental state, where you're sort of now more so leaning to the side of negative thinking. And you notice that. And once we notice that, okay, that's the first sign I've now become angry. Then the corrective actions right there. So what actions should we actually take? Well, the actions we should take is, all right, we should inject logic, which is the next step. So these first two steps right there is what create injecting logic. The injecting logic is what we're going to go over in the next step. So first, what I want you to do is, again, I want you to understand where this is coming from. So what is that A to Z? What is happening in between that A to Z? Because it's not a binary thing. It's not where we take a loss and now we are suddenly revenge trading. It might seem like that, but we can dissect it even more. We can dissect it more where we can understand what the actual next trigger is. So constantly, it's a boundary. We are now tapping the table. We are now hitting the desk. We are now not sure. We're now screaming all of a sudden. And now we are looking to take another trade. So we have multiple steps that lead us to that revenge trading, lead us to that over trading. So for example, here on the anger level that we are seeing, we have 1 to 10 right there. Describe the thoughts, emotions, things you say, behaviors, and actions that highlight each level of anger. Complete at least 3 levels. So what are the different anger levels that we encounter from that A to Z? Where number 1 could again be, we're taking a loss right there, so I'm getting a little bit annoyed. I have a little bit of that annoyed feeling after taking a loss. Perfect. 10 could be, I'm now revenge trading. In between that, we have different signs. So again, that can be a sign, I'm tapping my table, I'm tapping my foot. I am sort of slamming on my chair, I'm slamming my desk a little bit. I'm getting a little bit annoyed. Those face muscles, remember. So those are the different signs that we can encounter before we reach number 10. And 10 being, again, that we are actually now doing the act. We are actually revenge trading. We're actually over trading right now. So that is what we want to find out first. Because if we find that out, then we can inject logic at those moments. So then on the right side, we have technical changes. Describe the quality of your decision making, perception of the market, opportunities, or current positions at each level of anger. So the levels of anger we had encountered on the left right there. And we had filled in. There's also a correlated technical change that happens at that moment. So for example, the first one right there is, we take a loss. I'm now in an impulsive state. As in, I now think that the market might still be going in my direction. So I'm looking to add onto a new position after I take that first loss right there. Number 10 could be, all right, I'm now super angry because at the technical change level, I am now over trading. I'm now placing a lot of orders in the market and I'm trying to force my will into the market. So in between that, tapping our table, for example, could be at level 3 right there. Could be at level 3. That is the next step that we could be getting angry. That's a sign that we could be getting angry. And the longer you pay attention to these things, the more signs you're going to notice. And again, we can only notice this if we start to pay attention to it. So if we start to journal the data collection. So the technical change by tapping my table right there could be, I'm now scouting for a new entry. So I'm now actually opening my trading view again, and I'm now placing the position tool to actually look for a new entry. That could be the technical change right there. Seeing or thinking that there's a new opportunity as well. That could be the technical change. So the anger level and the technical changes right there, the 1 to 10 right there, those are the most important for your profiles, finding the cycles that we go through before we actually reach the end, which could be revenge trading, which could be forcing a trade ID, for example, which could be all kinds of different obstacles that we have encountered in the data collection. Then in the left bottom, we see anger triggers. So the anger triggers, again, that's already what we've gone over a little bit. I do not think this is the most relevant. The same as history of anger right there. It's also not the most relevant. But if you want right there, you can look to add on to the anger triggers. So what are the actual triggers that make you angry, that make you annoyed? Then the history of anger, so that is very personal, and psychology is as well very personal. It's a very personal journey actually, and I can only give you the guidelines where right there, history of anger is, again, what could be your history with getting angry overall. So that's, again, a very personal question. Feel free to do that as well if you want to do that, if you notice that you have been dealing this for a longer period of time as well. So after this, we have found out right now a certain pattern, so a certain cycle that happens. When we are losing a trade, we now usually end up revenge trading. And in the meantime, we have different patterns that happen. So we have different changes in behavior that happen before we actually reach that revenge trading. That's good to know. Because then we move on to the mental hand history right here. And the mental hand history is, again, the goal of this is create a logical statement to now defeat it. So we had 3 steps. Find the obstacle, gather the details, create a logical statement to defeat that obstacle. Those are goals. So the mental hand history will help us in creating a logical statement. Do you actually need the mental hand history? It's a tool to guide you towards a goal again. And the goal here is creating a logical statement that you can inject once you find a certain pattern. Meaning that right here, we just want to reinforce some logic. Once we are getting angry, it can be very useful to actually reinforce the idea of something logical. So to say, for example, if we're angry, okay, we need to calm down. It's a very logical statement, and that could help in that moment to actually now take a step back and to not revenge trade anymore. So describe the problem in detail. The first step, I get angry whenever I take a loss. I want to immediately get back into the market to recoup that loss. The loss leads me to revenge trade, and it always ends up making me lose way more than I initially lost. Of course, this is, again, the depending on the obstacle that you are dealing with right now. So currently we're dealing with anger. All right, number 2, explain why it makes logical sense that you have this problem, or why you think, feel, or react that way. I lost. Losing always hurts. It will never be a nice feeling, and when I lose, I want to immediately repair the damage that I did. I place too much importance on one loss, and I don't zoom out anymore. I think it's human nature. And oftentimes, the reason I said I think it's human nature is because oftentimes, whenever we take a loss, and this is why trading is such a difficult profession, because when you take a loss in a market, it's almost like it's linked to sort of dying. And that might sound very extreme, but when we lost back in the days, and I mean hundreds and thousands of years ago, when we were just developing as humans, the human nature in us right there, that if we lost something, we either lost our lives, we either lost our group that we were a part of, and we were sent on our own right now. We either lost family or something like that. So losing here is also understanding that losing in the market, you're not actually losing anything. So we need to overcome that. We need to overcome that thought that we are all of a sudden losing our whole lives. And that is what it feels like sometimes when we are losing. But we are not losing anything. We are just simply losing a percentage. And over the long period of time, we're actually profitable. So that is important to understand as well. 3, explain why the logic in step 2 is flawed. Whilst I do think it's human nature, I don't think we should use that as an excuse, because there are many traders out there that don't have overcome this obstacle already. So what I'm trying to say right there, I'm not sure I didn't word it perfectly, because there are many traders out there that have overcome this obstacle already. That's what I'm trying to say. Didn't word it perfectly. And that is true, right? Because the step 2 right there, yes, it could be human nature, but there are traders out there that have already overcome this obstacle. So you're telling me that there are traders out there that had the same thing as me, but they've already overcome it. All right. So we have no reason to act as a victim right there. And we take that responsibility right now to understand if they have done it, we can also do it. 100%. Perfect. So step number 4, come up with a correction to that flawed logic. Well, losing indeed hurts, but blowing an account hurts way more than losing just simply 1%, which would have been, for example, the trade we actually lost just 1%. I always remind myself that I zoom out. I only lost 1%, one good trade, and I might double that amount. It's time to take a step back and regenerate the brain points. Remember the psychology meter? Right there, we are in the midst of actually going to the right in our psychology meter, meaning that we are now at a high risk of error. So if we don't take a step back, and if we don't allow ourselves to actually regenerate those brain points, then what happens? We are likely going to have that revenge trading that we talked about right there. So that is very important to understand, that number 4 is also extremely important, because that leads to number 5. And number 5 is explain why that correction is correct. Blowing an account hurts way more because the regret that comes with it. It's an endless cycle. If I keep on revenge trading, and sometimes I will recoup the losses, and that's very dangerous because the habit of revenge trading will stick with me. Then it will only be a matter of time before I will do it again and I will blow the account. So what have we just done? We have just created a logical statement. The logical statement right there is, again, we can say number 4 and number 5 to ourselves, where losing indeed hurts, but blowing an account hurts way more. So the overall goal right here that we achieved is an injecting logic statement. That injecting logic statement is right now where we also need to use the anger profile to identify when we need to inject that logic. So the anger profile led us from that 1 to 10. In between that, we had different kinds of behaviors. Remember the tapping the table, the face muscles, for example. Now it's our goal to recognize that. And because we are aware of it, we can recognize it more easily. When we can recognize it more easily, we now want to inject logic as soon as we notice the first sign. For example, the first sign that we actually had was taking a loss. So taking a loss right there was the first sign. So the first sign right there, which is taking a loss, could now lead us to inject that logic immediately. Boom. We immediately say to ourselves, blowing an account hurts way more, take that step back. Blowing an account hurts way more, take that step back. It's okay to lose. You only lost 1%. Remember the bigger picture? And when you have that positive reinforcement in your mind constantly, every time you have that trigger, over time, that will create what? Create a habit. And that habit right there will be very important because that habit will reinforce the idea that you will not mess up in your psychology again. Where currently the habit could be, all right, let's now tap our table. All right, what is the next habit because of that? Let's now get angry. Let's now start screaming. What is the next habit because of that? Well, let's now place a new order in the market. It's a habit that we are dealing with. Habits can't be removed. They can be replaced. So the habit should be replaced. Where the habit and the healthy habit should now be, we inject logic. We have positive reinforcement into our mind. That's why being positive in the first place is so important. Because being positive right there is, all right, I took a loss, but maybe I can learn from this right there. Maybe I can take a step back first. Maybe I can see maybe if I did something wrong, if I did anything wrong at all. Perfect. So right here, this is where I can now, again, see the positive things in what you perceive as negative things, which is very simply said, injecting logic. Injecting that positive logic statement right there will eventually create a habit. Where the first time you take a loss, whenever I take a loss, the first thing that goes through my mind is, well, it could be I'm a bit annoyed. But overall, I know I take a step back. I take a step back. It's only 1% of the count. Perfect. Focus on the next trade. It's my injecting logic statement. And I consistently do that every time I take a loss, where it becomes a habit right now. And when it becomes a habit, you don't have that annoying, angry feeling anymore when you take a loss. Because you're switching, you're flipping the tables. That is our goal right there. So what have we done? We find the obstacle, we gather the details, we create a logical statement because of that. That logical statement is, again, we want to apply that logical statement once we notice the first sign that we are actually finding the obstacle. As in, once we notice the first sign of actually getting greedy, of getting that confidence obstacle, of getting angry, which could be a loss, for example. The first sign we notice right there at our anger level, on the anger profile, on the greed profile, whatever it is, whichever profile it is where we want to inject logic. Because that injecting logic is what we want to do as soon as possible before we arrive at number 10. Because arriving at that number 10 is what? It's revenge trading. It's over trading right now. We want to inject logic before that because then we can actually prevent it. So if we do this over and over and over, and again, this is an ongoing process, meaning that you will always have certain obstacles where, of course, over time, currently, if I do say so myself, I don't really have any major obstacle anymore that is withholding me from just focusing on my technical analysis where I can actually just do what I need to do. But you will always have one obstacle that is stronger than the other. That obstacle is what we now need to work on. Create that injecting logic statement. And that injecting logic statement is a one-time thing because that trigger is what you constantly want to work on. You want to find the earliest trigger that could be the trigger right there for you getting angry, for you getting greedy, for you getting that discipline problem, for example. Once we find that, perfect. We can inject that logic as early, as soon as possible, and we create the healthy habit of now actually having that positive logic into our mind. And this is a constant cycle. So the cycle is find the obstacle, gather the details, create a logical statement. Find the obstacle, gather details, create a logical statement. This is constantly what you would be doing. And then after that, after you've done that, of course, it's just, all right, what is my path? So what is the move from 1 to 10? And we inject that logic constantly in between moving from 1 to 10. This is how we get rid of the rest of the obstacles in our mind. If we do this over and over and over. So work on this. And again, in the beginning, it might seem, it could not be that clear. So that is where we need the data collection worksheet. We need to journal. We need to be aware of what we're actually doing. And over time, the obstacle will become more clear. Once the obstacle is more clear, we can work on defeating it. That is our goal right there. All right, perfect. Thank you.